Okay, document B, slave ship captain. We're going to check out Captain Thomas Phillips today, and we'll jump down here. So this is Thomas Phillips, a collection of voyages and travels, 1732, and our first question is a sourcing question, and we're going to look at who was this guy, when did he write it, and what about his background helps us understand his perspective. So what we do know is from here, Captain Thomas Phillips transported slaves from Africa to Barbados on the ship Hannibal in 1693. The ship left the African island of Sao Tome on August 25th and arrived in Barbados on November 4th. So Africa to Barbados. Barbados sits on the eastern edge of the Caribbean island chain. It's not far from mainland Venezuela in South America. It's a relatively short distance from Africa to Barbados. It's about as short as it gets between the two continents and coming across the Atlantic. But it still tells us that this was about a 10-week voyage. And that's important to note because it's 10 weeks on a ship, a slave ship. And it ain't pretty. But August 25th to November 4th, roughly 10 weeks. It's funded by the Royal African Company of London. And we are going to learn that Captain Phillips, it's in his interest to not only get them there safe and sound, but to get them there alive. And that's because he makes more money per person. The company makes more money per person than if they are dead or dying. And so there is an incentive for the captain and his crew to take care of the cargo, the human cargo in this case. So let's jump into here and see exactly what we know. So that's the background. We're going to get that. He sees that in some respects, Captain Phillips sees this as a job, and he's part of the company, and it's his job to get them there alive. And there is a financial incentive for him to do that. But so that's his background. That's going to help you with the first sourcing question. The next question is given that situation, what does the crew do for the slaves? And then we'll answer the third question, which is why is it according to Phillips, why is it such a crappy thing to be a slave trader? So he says, there happened such sickening immortality among my poor men. That's referring to his crew and Negroes. And so he's referring to the African slaves. So there happened such sickening and mortality. So lots of people got sick, lots of people died. Of the first, we buried 14. So he lost 14 of his crew. And of the last, the Negro slaves, we lost 320. So 320 slaves die on the trip over. And he says this was a great detriment to our voyage. So it sucked. And then he explains why. The Royal African, or one of the reasons why, the Royal African Company losing 10 pounds by every slave that died. So the goal is, it's a business. The goal is to make money moving this kind of cargo from A to B, Africa to Barbados. And if 320 of the cargo dies, that's 10 pounds of money that nobody's going to pay for. You're not going to pay for a dead slave that's been thrown overboard. You're only going to pay for healthy slaves. And so if you lose 320 of them, that's money lost. And that's his perspective here. The distemper which my men, his crew, as well as the blacks, mostly died of was the white flux. So distemper means the sickness, the disease. And he says it was mostly of this white flux. And if we go down here, you can see that the white flux, unfortunately, you can discover that white flux is an intestinal infection that caused intense diarrhea. So it's nasty, it's painful. And it's all happening on a ship over a 10-week period in the Atlantic Ocean in the fall. And just things are moving pretty pretty slow. And so they died of the white flux. And then he goes on to say that the Negroes are so vulnerable to the smallpox that few ships that carry them escape without it. So there's also, in addition to this nasty intestinal infection, there is the smallpox. And without fail on these trips, some of the Negroes get the smallpox. And he says it makes vast havoc and destruction among them. So there's probably this, you can just imagine, not everybody's just sitting still and taking this in stride. There was probably people freaking out and doing God knows what, as and also trying to rise up and I don't know, do whatever it is. What do you do in the middle of the ocean if you're dying of a disease and you don't have the cure? So it probably gets, he says it's vast havoc and destruction. And so he goes on, but though we had 100 at a time, this is the smallpox, we lost not above a dozen by it. So it got ugly, people freaked out, but they only lost about a dozen people died. And then he continues, but what the smallpox spared for those that didn't die of smallpox, the flux swept off to our great regret. After all our pains and care to give the slaves their messes, which is their meals, keeping their lodgings as clean and sweet as possible, and enduring so much misery and stench so long among creatures nastier than swine, only to be defeated by their mortality. So this is getting back to, this is a good piece. Remember, our second question is what did the crew do for the slaves? And here's your answer here. They took pains and care to give the masses, to give their messes, to feed them, to keep it clean. They did their best to keep it clean and keep them fed and keep them healthy, because that was in their best interest in terms of making money, and probably things go smoother if everybody's not dying and freaking out. So there is an incentive for the crew to take care of the slaves. However, as we learn, it looks like, intense diarrhea happens, and so it gets nasty. And but this is your answer to number 2. And I was saying, make sure you are copying this as you go. Don't simply answer your guided questions. Bring evidence down along with you as you discover the best evidence. Bring it, copy, paste it, put it in yellow, highlight it in yellow, put it in quotes. That's going to make this a lot easier for you when you're finished and it's time to organize and structure your essay. So I would copy and paste this, and I'll show you where I've done that below in the guided questions. But that's your answer to number 2. The third part is, and I'll just, before I get to that, this comment here is, I think, indicative of an idea that we refer to as dehumanization. In order for human beings to treat other human beings as if they are not human, it is typical for them to somehow lower their status, refer to them as insects, refer to them as bugs, refer to them as rats, anything but referring to them as humans, because it's unnatural for human beings to kill or torture or subject other human beings that they see as equals. So you have to create a mentality that they are not equal. And the notion that they are nastier than swine meaning pigs, is I think a good example of that. How do you do something like this if you see them as your equals? Well, you don't see them as your equals. You see them as animals. And so I think that's a clue there that we get to, just as how do you make sense of something like this? And I think that's part of that. I think that helps us. The third question is found here, and I highlighted twice the misery. No gold finders can endure so much noisome slavery as they do who carry Negroes. We endure twice the misery, and yet by their mortality, our voyages are ruined. So why does it suck to be a slave trader? You do all this work, you try your hardest to keep them alive, they still die, and then you don't make as much money as you could. And that's sort of twice the misery. So the voyage itself is dangerous on several levels. It can get violent. It's nasty. It's gross, and it's possible that because they are humans, they are mortals. they die, and that ruins the whole point of the business venture. So that's sort of the combo idea that he adds there, and he explains why and this is essentially why it stinks to be. Not only does it suck for the slaves, he's claiming that it sucks for the crew too, and it's just a nasty, ugly thing. Let me just show you, and then we'll cut away. So as I was saying, make sure you are bringing down evidence. So here's your questions, 1, 2, and 3. Make sure you're bringing evidence along with you, and that's going to help you out quite a bit in the end.